Okay, after considering all my different options for making pieces of America quilts out of fabric, by the way, these are also going to be, the potholder quilts are also pieces of America quilts because of the one that I got back. But when making them out of fabric with a backing, yesterday I was saying that knitting them seems like the easiest way to do the backing because you can just change the stitches. And this is working perfectly. I'm trying to put together a very, very basic toolkit that anybody can have with them and do, believe it or not, both quilts or fabric, as I talked about in the Pieces of America fabric, or landscape design. So, what I did, I still have my knitting there, but what I did was I made myself a 4.5-inch template. And I'll tell you why. I am going to use 4.5-inch square fabric pieces. I'll still do 25, which will be 5 across and 5 down. But the advantage of the Weave It squares and their consistency, the knitting is consistent as well. But these use so much less yarn. Each square takes 7 yards. You can figure out exactly how much yarn you're going to need. You don't, it's thinner, it's going to be easier to put together if you sew them by hand. I'm going to end up tying them. But anyway, the consistency of the Weave It squares is really what kind of won me over here. So I made myself a 4.5-inch template, which will be for all fabric squares. So now I can do that. Now you see a handheld manual here. And I did put the 2 Model 20s away because this would almost all fit in a lunchbox, with the exception of your yarn or fabric. And I have done that with Model 20s. I have some toolboxes where I could have a bigger machine. But you can do the false quilting I talked about on the top. You can also do the piecing with a handheld manual that is about 4 inches wide. So we have a handheld sewing machine with a box of bobbins for different color. So if I pick up this fabric, I could either do dark thread or light thread. So as long as I have the bobbins, I can switch them very quickly. A pin loom. Now, this is not a Weave It brand. It's my old one from when I was a kid. But it made these with the same method as the Weave It looms in the original gauge. So, I mean, and you can just add yarns on. What I tend to do is try to put the knots on the end so they're not in the middle. So there is my backing. And when all the fabric pieces are sewn together, they're going to be the same size as the Weave It's. That's the real advantage. So, a flower loom. This is a very simple flower loom that you can make. They come out the same size as my tree logo, which is about that big. So you could put a flower in the center of either side if you wanted to. But because of the landscape design, they would be your tree, because everything else is going to go around or support a tree. Luciding. When you lucid a cord, this can be any kind of a border. It can be all of these are either for quilts or landscape design. But when I double lucid this, I end up with little fat chunky, they look like window boxes. And depending on the colors you use, you could do them in gray and just put tiny seed stitches in them of color, and they could be window boxes. So a lucid is a good tool to have. You could just make, if you were doing landscape design, make rope like this and sew it to the edge of each drawing for a more finished effect. These two knitters will make circles that actually you could flatten out and stitch down if you wanted to. To make them hold their shape, you connect pipe cleaners for as long as you need, as big as the circle is, and you just stick the pipe cleaner inside the knitting and you have a circle that can be stitched down in place. So basically we've got scissors, a Weave It loom, a couple of knitting spools and a lucet, our fabric with a 4.5-inch template, a flower loom. These are wonderful. I do still have a flower loom video to do because Hero Scoville made pretty blue ones made in the U.S. This one happens to be from Italy. And a manual stitcher to piece the squares together, the fabric squares, which would then be tied through the 2 layers of fabric and weaving. You would need an embroidery needle or a tapestry needle to sew the squares together here. But basically that's it. This is all you would need to be able to make pages and then either turn them into fabric that's lined. Like I can make fabric out of the fabric, and say I need 2 or say 4 25 block squares, and 4 of these, I've got a lined vest. You know, I mean, you can either back it or not back it, but this is really all you need for an everyday toolbox with a bobbin box, a tapestry needle, thread, yarn, and fabric.